Thanks for tuning in to watch The Ordinary Filmmaker. It's Saturday, October the 2nd. I don't know how we got to October so quickly. It's Saturday, October the 2nd, 2021. In this video, I'm going to take a look at this week's top news and rumors, and then I'm going to answer your questions and provide my analysis and careful thinking. One thing though, please go ahead and like and subscribe. Your likes and subscribes really do help this channel grow, and all you have to do is just reach over, just click that subscribe. Come on, thank you very much. All right, now let's move on to the news, and we got a couple of news items this week. I'm not going to go into an awful lot of detail because I already covered it off in these videos that I'm going to put right up here. So as I talk about each news item, you're going to see a little picture there, as well as a link that you can click on to watch the full details. Now, the last story that I covered was DJI's Mavic Pro. The next iteration, the Mavic Pro 3, is due to drop mid-November, and it's supposed to come in 3 SKUs. The prices ranging from $1,599 all the way up to $5,700. Now that higher price, the $5,700, I don't quite believe that. I don't think we're going to see a price that high, although I do believe that it's going to reach around $2,600. And this is a new premium cinema bundle. It's going to have lots of goodies, batteries, and the one thing we're not sure about is if it's going to have baked-in internal storage up to 1 terabyte NVMe, or if it's going to support an NVMe drive. We'll just have to wait and see about that. But in terms of the cost, the features, and availability, we're going to get 3 separate SKUs. The base model is going to be around $1,599. Then they're going to have a Fly More bundle that's going to be probably around $2,000. And then, of course, we've got the premium Cine bundle. And just a couple of notes here. It's going to have 2 cameras, a telephoto and a wide. The telephoto is going to be 15 degrees. It's going to have a 15-degree field of view, while the the wide angle is going to have 28-degree field of view. And a 1 meter minimum focus distance. And as far as optical zoom goes, it's going to be the equivalent of around 28. And it's going to have a new smart controller with a built-in LCD at 1080p and lots of other goodies. So I recommend, if you're interested in the DJI Mavic Pro 3 and you can afford their new prices, go ahead and take a look at this video here. Right, the next news item we have is about Olympus, their new WOW camera. Just a reminder that the Olympus WOW camera is set to be teased, or we're going to get some sort of development announcement in the upcoming weeks to months. It's supposed to drop sometime in the fall of 2021. Also from Canon, we got 2 registered cameras thanks to Nakashita. It's a Russian site, so we didn't find out any details. It didn't tell us anything such as Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, or anything like that. All we know is that 2 cameras have been registered, and based on what Nakashita said, it's got nothing to do with the R3. So that leads us to believe what cameras could it possibly be? Well, obviously most of us would really like to see a replacement for the RP, and I keep saying Canon isn't going to produce an EOS R Mark II. That camera is done with, but we are going to get a camera that's probably going to appeal to you, that's going to be better than the EOS R, and it's going to sit somewhere between the replacement EOS RP and the R6. It'll be mid-capable, but also mid-priced. So definitely somewhere under $2,000. So that's really, really exciting. But what is really exciting this week is we got a teaser. Canon Rumors put this out as a CR2, which means it comes from known sources, and the news has been validated. We are definitely getting an APS-C censored camera, and this APS-C censored camera is going to be back illuminated. Let me just check my notes here. Yes, APS-C RF mount. Megapixel size 28 to 32, and when is it going to drop? Sorry, it's not going to drop this year, but the rumor says it's going to drop sometime in the second half of 2022. Let me put my glasses on. It's supposed to drop by around the second quarter of 2022. You know, I'm going to keep my glasses on for the rest of these, and that's the rest of those. So some very interesting things this week. What I would really do, the real big news has yet to be made. Keep an eye on the next couple of weeks. This is when I really expect we're going to get some announcements. Very little has happened this year. We had the Sony Alpha 1 way back in January, and the year got off to a big start. But now look at us. What have we had? There's very little that's come out. We've had almost nothing all summer long. And so here we are getting up to the end of 2021. I really do expect here we are, now that we're in October, that we start to get some announcements. And then, of course, it'll get a little quiet around late November, December, and then into, I guess, January. Almost starts in January. From January to May, hopefully, things start to get really exciting again. And the big reason for all this is supply chains, verticals around the world. Everything is pulled tight. There isn't any room. There's difficulty not just getting semiconductors, but other parts. There's problems in shipping. There's problems in storage. There's problems getting containers to ship things, to be able to store things, and etc. So that makes it a little more difficult to report rumors too, because of a lot of people working from home. Information isn't moving around nearly as readily as it used to before. People are only talking to who they have to talk. There isn't as many meetings, or when meetings are booked, it's just the people they need to get into the meetings. Things have really changed with this work to home, this new work to home way of working. All right, well, that covers off the news. Again, don't forget to subscribe and like. And now I'm going to take your questions. Our first question is from Tev. Do you think Canon will make an APS-C mirrorless camera body for the RF mount soon? Well, you know, I've kind of already answered that question. So Canon Rumors came out this week and said, with a CR2, a validated rumor from a known source. And Craig, I know these are rumors, guys, but Craig is very good at validating and sussing out information. So when it comes to rumors on cameras, a lot of what Craig puts on his site, you can trust it. But again, look at his designation. Is it a CR0 or CR1? It's just speculative. But if he puts a CR2 or CR3, you want to consider that to be credible, because his track record on CR2s and CR3s is very, very good. Right? That being said, we are supposed to be getting an APS-C camera in the first half of 2022. And really, this makes a lot of sense. Canon's already tossed out a few breadcrumbs for us. They've said they've stopped producing new lenses and bodies for the EF mount. So they're kind of done with that. They'll still keep producing lenses and cameras that are selling. They're not completely done with it. The same with the EF-M mount. They'll still keep producing lenses and bodies that they've already put out there. But this need to go ahead and create new lenses, it's not there. All their development, the main focus of what Canon is doing with their camera line, their stills hybrid camera line, is on the RF mount, or the R system. And it just makes sense to bring an APS-C to that line. Now, as the market keeps shrinking, this year the market is projected to reach 7.11 million sales worldwide. Mirrorless and DSLRs, interchangeable lens cameras, at 7.11 million. That's not much. So as the market keeps shrinking, Canon and others might make decisions to, well, eliminate certain models. And that's not completely unforeseen. They were supposed to be coming out with a 5D Mark V DSLR until things went crazy about a year ago, and they decided not to go ahead with that camera. Now, what I do expect them to do, I do expect them to come out with a successor to the 90D. It's a very, very popular camera. I also expect them to come out with a successor to the 7D Mark II, again on the R system. So yeah, definitely at this point, all the information that we've got is pointing to APS-C cameras on the R system, and we can expect to see something by June of next year at the latest. Our next question comes from Deepaker. Irrespective of these new camera announcements, total camera sales are still a fraction of phone sales. What steps are Canon and other manufacturers making to make cameras more mainstream, including GPS, intervalometer, smooth FTP, and other features as default, and then advertising? When it comes to cameras, the most popular camera sold worldwide belongs to a smartphone. And when we see the innovation that companies like Apple are doing, the iPhone 12, the iPhone 13, these cameras aren't getting rave reviews, and people aren't flocking to buy these cameras because of the lenses, because of the sensor size and the color range and dynamic range, because they're not that great. They're very, very small sensors. They're smaller than Micro Four Thirds sensors. And I've had many comments saying that Micro Four Thirds is dead, it's too small. Well, it's about the right size. And when it comes to smartphones, even though it's a smaller sensor, it fits into a mobile device that most people see them needing in their lives. And because these phones have cameras that are good enough to produce great shots for most people, those people aren't flocking to mirrorless or DSLR cameras. There's no need to. And even people like me who look at them and go like, yeah, I know the lenses aren't great. I'm not going to be able to produce the same quality photos and videos that I could with a 50mm f1.2. But when I'm out, when I'm traveling with my wife, yes, I'm focused on shooting video. I've got my camera set up for video. But when it comes to stills, I let my wife take care of that on her iPhone 6S. That's right, iPhone 6S. And she takes really good photos. She's happy with it. Sometimes I'll pull stills from the video that I shoot. And this is the real story here. These cameras are being sold because it's a convergence of phone technology, camera technology, and even computer technology. A lot of people like my wife don't use a computer. Everything is done on their phone. So while these phones do cost a lot of money, over $1,000 US or close to $2,000 Canadian, they're replacing computers, they're replacing cameras. And my wife, she's gone 6 years on this phone. I was going to say camera. She's gone 6 years on it, so when she needs another one, I have no problems getting her the top-end iPhone because it's going to last her and it's her everything. But what also makes these cameras so endearing to people is how easy they are to take a good photo or to take good video. I think Apple explains that they take somewhere between 14 and 20, or they take an image, but then they process it in one of 14 to 20 different ways, looking at dynamic range, looking at exposure, looking at skin tones, etc., 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 and are able to produce a really great shot. Whereas with my R5 and a really expensive lens, I have to get all the settings right, and I need to shoot in RAW, so if I screw up, I can fix it in post. But by the time I've taken that photo, taken it in post, tweaked it and everything, that moment is long gone, whereas my wife with her smartphone can take that photo, it instantly looks really good. All she has to do is crop and maybe go, yeah, you know, I'm going to change the editing a little bit, and then she can post it, email it, and send it. So what can these companies do? Well, keep an eye on Olympus, because I think what Olympus is working on is when they say they're coming out with a wow camera, I think it's going to be a way to impress us, take some of that workflow from smartphones, that computational power, that ease of use, taking that hardware and software and melding it together so it becomes one unit. And if they can do that in the new Olympus camera, I think that could definitely wow people. I don't think they're going to wow us on price, because you know what? For a company that's just spun off, that's trying to get its legs, when you try to compete on price, that's just a race to the basement, and that's not a strategic long-term view. Joey says, many Canon 90D owners, including myself, are waiting for an EOS R replacement to migrate to the RF system. Do you think Sony is aware of this and planning to intercept some of us with their own competitive offerings? If we're going to switch lens systems anyway, then why not consider all options? I want to cover a couple of things there. You don't have to switch lens systems. If you're shooting with the Canon 90D, all those lenses, both EF and EFS, will migrate over. Let me see, do I have it right? Here it is. So this is the EF to RF adapter, and it'll work with both. Here we go. Here, this is an EFS lens, and I don't have an EF lens. I've since sold those, but all I have to do is just mount it, find the right spots here. Probably should put my glasses on. There. There we go. And now I can put it on the Canon R5. There are some limitations. You're still going to get that 1.6 times crop, which means you can't shoot 4K HQ on this. But if you're looking at migrating to the R system, spend the $100. You don't need the $200 one with the control ring. I got it because they didn't have the $100 one. But get this, and then you can start using all your EFS and EF glass. And I think that's going to really help you out. And then as you have absorbed the cost of the body a few months later, then you can start looking at what lenses you want to get. My first lens was the 24-105 f4. It's weather sealed, it's general purpose, you can go, you can travel, you can do anything you want with it, and you can actually still get a lot of great shots and video without having to put a variable ND filter on it. So I really recommend looking at that. The other thing, do you think that Sony's aware of this? Well, to be honest, Sony's well ahead of Canon when it comes to mirrorless. They've been doing it for years. And unlike Canon, Sony doesn't have a hole in their mirrorless lineup. If you're looking at the Canon 90D, then Sony's equivalent would be the A6600. And if you're considering going to Sony, I would normally say go with the A7 III, but with the A7 IV due to be announced anytime this year or up until next year, we never know with Sony. You can wait 2 years for an update, or sometimes you wait 5 years, as we did with the A7S III. Yeah, it's really important to know this $100 adapter is problem-free. I haven't had any issues. I used to use the EF, the 1.2 EF, sorry, the 15mm 1.2 EF lens, and I used this adapter. I did it for months, and I never had a problem. So I highly recommend using that. I think that's probably the best way to go. Let me just, because if I don't do this now, I'm going to leave a mess for myself later on. Put that back there. There we go. Let me see the rest of your question. Do you think Sony covered that? If we say, yeah, I really think, and this is where it's tough. I don't know what lenses you have. I don't know what gear you have. And here's something to think about. If you're looking at lenses that you want to purchase, you're with the 90D and you don't know when they're going to come out with the EOS R replacement, you might be thinking, well, I want to get new lenses. If you're going to buy anything and you're looking at moving into the R system, maybe what you want to think of doing is buying EF lenses, not the EFS. They migrate very well over into the R system. There's no downside to it, other than the RF versions are slightly better, but the EF is so much cheaper, new, let alone used, and you can pick up some really great lenses. Like I picked up the 100 to 400 EF L series for under $1,000 Canadian, so 600 US. And sure, the 100 to 500 RF L series is amazing, but at $2,799 US, you know, that's a tough pill to swallow. So consider that huge list of EF glass. Things to consider though, if it's really old, you want to research into the focus motors and stabilization. How loud is it? Like the 24 to 105, get version 2, don't get version 1. Fine for photos, but if you're going to do video, you need, most of the times, you really want a quiet focus motor. And if you're going to do run and gun stuff, you want a general purpose lens, don't get that first version, get the version 2. And when is the EOS R Mark II going to come out? Well, there isn't going to be an EOS R Mark II. What we're going to see is an RP replacement, and then we're going to get a camera, as I mentioned earlier in the video when I talked about the rumors, we're going to get a camera that sits somewhere between the EOS RP and the R6. It's going to be midway capable between those two. But really the R6 is what I would consider the replacement, the EOS R Mark II. It beats the EOS R in most areas, but not all. And I published a video last December where I looked at the Canon EOS R5. I reviewed all its capabilities, but I did so in relation to the R6 and the EOS R. And you might want to look at that. You'd be surprised there's several areas where the EOS R is better than the R6. And it's right up here. Stop the FOMO says, any guesses as to whether Sony will put out a prosumer 8K cinema camera like the FX3? It feels wasteful that I have an alpha one with so many great camera-specific features, which I never use. I took it to New York City 2021 TV shootout and somebody yelled, hey, FOMO has an 8K camera. Maybe he can take a large group photo with amazing detail. But I had no idea how to use the timer, so we took the photo with an iPhone. I ended up recording a group in 8K video to take a screen grab later. Yeah, of course, they're definitely working on one, but with Sony, this is the problem, FOMO, is they do a very good job of plugging leaks. Like Sony doesn't leak much at all, but we know they're going to be coming out with 8K cameras. Now, what I'd be waiting is this October, I believe Sony has an announcement that they were going to do it at NAB 2021, and I believe a virtual announcement is coming up this week. So stay tuned there, and you might get an announcement of some 8K cameras. Canon has already teased us. We know that Canon's going to make an announcement of 2 8K cameras, one going to be Super 35 and one full frame, so I wouldn't be surprised if Sony isn't too far behind. But unlike the FX3, I don't think it's going to be priced nearly so well. I think these are going to be far more expensive. The Canon 8K ones are definitely in the 5 figures. We'll just have to wait and see what Sony's 8K cinema cameras cost. It really depends on whether they put out an entry-level one. Like Canon is planning on putting out an R5C, which is an 8K cinema camera to the FX3, although the A7S III doesn't do 8K, but the FX3 is basically a cinema version of the A7S III, and the R5C is supposed to be Canon's approach that Sony took with the FX3 in relation to the R5. A lot of acronyms there, but I hope everyone's still with me. If not, post a question in the comment section down below. Justin says, will we see mounts and adapters for true cinema lenses for mirrorless cameras? I have the R and the R5. I usually shoot photos, but I do a ton of video for churches, weddings, and events. I prefer using cameras versus true video cameras, and I have so many great lenses, but zooming is an issue. Is there some device or adapter to smoothly zoom? Well, yes, there is. And I've got one here to show you. Sorry for punching my mic there. I use this, the Crane 2S. It's a gimbal, and they come with a smooth focus motor that I can attach to it. I don't use it personally, but this will cover off multiple capabilities. It'll give you cinematically smooth video, but it will also give you that ability to carefully control zooming. And that's what I would recommend going with. I love these things. I was just out shooting with it earlier. Make sure that doesn't fall because it can hit me. And I just love that Crane 2S. I love gimbals. I love what they're able to do. And that is one way to be able to get it. As far as some other syncing device, I'm not aware of anything, honestly, because I don't use them. I just use the gimbal because it already has a lot of the foundations that I need, and that works really, really well for me. Anything else in here I want to mention? It's interesting you got the R and the R5. Those are two really nice cameras. And I agree with you that a lot of people ask the same thing, why don't you go with a video-only camera? Well, I think one of the biggest things that pulls us over is the huge number of lenses and attachments and accessories. There's a much larger market for the stills hybrid than there is for video cameras, so there's a whole lot more devices and accessories to choose from. And, you know, I understand why you do it. Ron asks, as a hybrid shooter, I currently own an EOS R. I shoot a lot of portraits for video. I'm exploring run and gun documentary style filmmaking. I'm really torn about upgrading to the R6 or R3, but I keep hearing rumblings about the EOS R5C. What would be the best bet for an ordinary new filmmaker like me? Well, based on what you're telling me and the price of the R3, you've got some decent funding to put towards these cameras, so I'm going to go down multiple different routes here. Now, you did mention R6 or R3. I would completely disregard the R6. I'd be looking at the R5 or the R3, because the R6 is far more limited in video capabilities than the R5. The R5, for example, can do 4K 30 indefinitely without overheating. You just have that 30-minute record limit. And of course, the R5 can do 8K oversampled 4K, better than what the R6 can do. You have 4K 120 frames per second. You have 8K RAW. There are a lot more video options for the R5, but this is where the R5 breaks down. It depends on where you live. The R5 does overheat. For me, living in Canada for 10 months of the year, it's not a big issue. For the run and gun style that I do, not a big issue too, because most of my clips are no more than 10 seconds to 30 seconds long, so I never get into that overheating. I might see the overheat timer tick down a little bit to maybe 15 minutes or 10 minutes, but by the time I move on to the next scene, it's kind of reset itself. What about the R3? Well, what the R3 does is it gives you 6K oversampled 4K, which is really good. Not as good as the R5, but you can record up to 6 hours, and you still have 60 frames per second. So I really like the video capabilities of the R3, but you're really paying a premium. That's a $6,000 camera. And if you're willing to buy the R3, then there's two other rumored cameras that I would consider. Now there's the R5C, as you pointed out, and really we know very little about this. I don't know if this is a real camera or this just lives in rumor land. But if it is due to come out, I would expect to hear some sort of rumblings this time, right now, between now and the end of October. I think that could be a perfect camera for you, but it depends. I know it's supposed to have active cooling. It's going to have a slightly larger body. But that overheating is something you really have to look at. Whereas the R1, well, it's going to have better video than the R5. It's going to have better stills capabilities than the R3 and the R5. And better still, it's probably going to adopt the thermals of the R3, so you can record for hours and hours and hours. And if you've got the budget for the R3, if you can wait and see what Canon does with the R1, because we know that camera's coming out. The R3 is not the R1. It's right there in the name. They've left room for an R series camera, or sorry, a 1 series camera. The only question we are asking is when. Rumors say by the second half of next year. That will put it at about 2 years since the 1DX Mark III came out. But historically, Canon's usually waited about 4 years before they refresh 1 series or even 5 series cameras. So we'll just have to wait and see. A lot of it's speculation right now. So really your only option, based on what you've given me, is probably the R3. That would be your best option. I wouldn't look at the R6. I would consider the R5 or the R6, but again, the R5, you've got to look at where you're going to be shooting, what type of shooting you're going to be doing, and is overheating going to be an issue for you? Rumor Has It asks, have you changed your Final Cut Pro workflow much since switching to the M1 Mac? Have you had any plugin issues since switching? No, I really haven't. I mean, I'm always tweaking my workflow a little bit. The biggest tweak I did is when I moved back down to the basement studio. I adjusted my lighting. I adjusted things in my camera, so I had to change my presets in Final Cut. But, you know, it's very simple what I do. Because my lighting doesn't change every time, everything is exactly the same. What I do is I recreate everything in Final Cut in terms of my color balance and grading and all that. So let's imagine I've just set up my studio. After I finish recording, I will do a color balance the first time. I put this up against my face, and I'll do this to create a different gray scale, so it's not just the white, it'll pick up the grays, and then I'll balance against that. Then what I do is I look at cropping, and you'll notice in a lot of my videos that right about here is where I'll put a graphical insert where I'll list information. So I'll create a transform where I move it over just enough to put in an insert, and then I create a crop. So sometimes I'll crop in to about here, and I make all those changes. I do my balancing, I white balance against the card, I do my color grading, and then what I do is I save it as a preset, and I create a folder called Canon R5, and this time around I said New Studio Preset, or New Studio 2, because I've got 2 of them in there. And so when I bring in new clips, I automatically apply that because the lighting hasn't changed or anything. It's automatically going to take care of the balancing, the grading, everything but the audio. And audio, all I do is I just usually raise it 2 decibels and add a bit of bass. And by the time I've done that, it's no quicker than adding a sound preset. So that's really all I do for sound. And it makes my workflow pretty simple. But I did change hardware. And I went from an iMac Pro, which is a very, very beefy machine, to this thing here. And what I noticed is when it came to these plugins, they're not very efficient. They are just pigs when it comes to processing. And that was the same with the iMac Pro as it is here. But what I did notice is there are places where the M1 is a lot faster, even though this only has 8 gigs of RAM. When it comes to exporting, it's about 60% faster. I can edit and do everything with C-Log3 without having to convert it to ProRes or anything like that. So it is definitely faster, but yeah, I really haven't had any issues. The biggest saver for me is just using those presets that I do every time, but outside of that, nothing else has really changed. And our last question for today is from Marcus Rudd. Was buying 7 RF lenses a horrible, horrible mistake? I don't know, Marcus, was it? Do you use them? Do you make money from this? Is this your hobby? Sounds like you're bragging a little bit. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, I think 4 or 5 RF lenses, and I don't really regret any of them. It really depends. Do you use these on a regular basis? And if not, you can probably sell them because supplies are really, really constrained. You're not going to lose much on the ones you sell. So if you don't think you need them, go ahead and sell them. And then that eliminates that question, right? Get out and use them. There are sometimes there's overlaps. Like I use the 24 to 105 an awful lot. I use the 50 millimeter an awful lot. But the 100 millimeter, it's it gets used occasionally. Same with the 800mm, it gets used occasionally. But nothing else can reproduce the results of those cameras. The 24-105 can do 100, but it's not a macro. And there's nothing else that gives me 800 or 1600 millimeters. I got the 2x extender, so, you know, it's like any job. You know, what you do is you put the tools in the bag to get the job done. If I'm doing wildlife, I'm going to take the 800 with me and the 2x extender. If I want to do macro stuff or close-up stuff, I'll take the 100mm macro. If I'm going to be doing channel stuff, I'm always going to put on the 50mm f1.2. It works really, really well, especially if I'm in low light. But if I'm taking B-roll or doing family stuff, general purpose stuff, I'll put on the 24-105. And I can operate in bright sunlight without needing a variable ND filter. So I really can't answer that question. You need to tell me more information. And for you watching at home, if you do have any questions about anything, go ahead and post them in the comments section down below. I may choose your question to be answered on my weekly Q&A. But I also pay attention to comments that come through. Whenever I post a video, I usually stay online for an hour or two, depending on how bored I am, and I will actively comment or actively answer your questions and comment on your comments. So feel free. I'm very interactive in this channel. And also, please do me a favor. If you like my channel, you like my content, even if you only watch occasionally, please go ahead and reach over. I know it's hard to do because you're comfortable right now. Just reach over, press that subscribe button, hit like, because I kid you not, it really does make a big difference with YouTube. The more that this happens, the more they recommend my content to others. And since I've started asking everybody to please do that, in this week alone, I've noticed a huge difference. My subscribes have gone up, my likes and comments have gone up, and believe it or not, the income has gone up. At this month, I'll try that again. This month, I'm looking at making about 500 US just from the YouTube revenue alone, compared to just 260 last month. And last month I kind of thought 260, okay, I can't really buy anything. Camera gear is expensive, as you know, so the more I can make off this channel, and it doesn't cost you anything just watching. This is what I get from you guys watching from the ad revenue. The more months where I make 500 or more, the sooner I can purchase other equipment. And what I'm really looking towards is the eventual release of the STM lenses, the 1200 and 2000 millimeter lenses. The 1200 is supposed to be an f8, so with a 2x extender, that will be pretty amazing. 1200 at f8, that'd be f16, that'd be 2400 with a 2x extender, and the 2000 millimeter, I think it's an f15. Even with a 2x extender, that puts it to f30. I'm going to still try it. You know I am. I have to try it. You know, one of the first things I'm going to do is take it out, try it on the moon, and try it on Jupiter. I just love playing around with it. But we'll have to see how much it costs. The 2000 millimeter, even being an STM, it might just put it into that price range where it might be a little difficult. It might make more sense to get the 1200 millimeter and use the 2x extender than get the 2000 millimeter. We'll just have to wait and see. But that really covers it for this week. I don't really have anything else to add in terms of behind the scenes. Well, you know, I do have one thing. It's currently about 2 o'clock. It's Friday afternoon. I'm not working today. I took the day off, and I'm glad I did. I had a great breakfast this morning. My wife made me a nice, well, it's like an Egg McMuffin, only it's got way better flavor, a nice orange pekoe cup of tea, some of these grapes that were incredible, and that was my breakfast. And then I thought, you know what, it's 10 o'clock, I'm going to go outside. So I took the gimbal, I took the camera, so hopefully everything's framed properly. I adjusted it a little bit, and I took the 24-105 and the R5. I also took out my Mavic Pro. I went out on 2 trips. The Mavic Pro was a second trip. My son wants to go apple hunting tomorrow, so we can make our own fresh organic apple juice. The apples, the wild apples, aren't the best this year because we haven't had a lot of rain. It's kind of like biting into one of those styrofoam apples. You know, there's just no moisture in them. But we're going to cheat. We're going to film him going out to the different trees. There's a whole bunch. There's like 6 or 7 trees, and no one ever goes there. They look beautiful, colorful. So it's a great scene. I'm going to shoot him running to the different trees, running through the tall grass. It's taller than him. And I'm going to capture all that. But what I did at 10 o'clock this morning, the way the sun hits from the, I think it's the east side, the way the sun hits the trees, I went out there and grabbed a bunch of B-roll ahead of time. Brought it into the computer, did the balancing. It looked pretty good. I was pretty happy with it. And it lets me know, okay, what B-roll did I not get right or that I want to get and I can try for tomorrow. So I got all that, brought it in. And maybe what I'll do is after this, I'll go back out again. I'll get some B-roll with the sun on the other side towards the west and get a different viewpoint. So I've got some really great B-roll. Even the way it is right now, I've got more B-roll than I probably need. And then I'll shoot my sun tomorrow. But one of the things I was playing around with, because I've been shooting with Canon log since December of last year, and C-Log 1, it's a battle. It's tough. Don't use it. But C-Log 3, I finally got it to the point where I can figure it out. I know what to do with it. And in case you're having any trouble, this is what I recommend doing. So I'm basing this off the 24-105 f4. It's a pretty common lens. And it's quite simple to operate. Now, most of the times, if I'm shooting and it's full-on sun, I'm going to be at f22. The shutter's going to be at the shutter's going to be at 1/60th. The f-stop, again, f22. I'm thinking of it in terms of everything in the viewfinder. I'm remembering where everything is. Now, ISO, I always let float. And that's very simple. So I'm in bright sun. If the sun is behind the person and I can expose it well, that works well. Now, usually what I'll try and do is I'll bring it in tight, but still it works very, very well. But when that changes and I have a mix of shade and sun, or I'm trying to pull apples from a tree, but the apples are in the tree a bit, so I don't want to expose for the little bit of sun that's poking through, I will ever so slightly change the f-stop until it looks right through the viewfinder. But what I'm doing is I'm just half pressing the shutter button and I'm watching what the ISO is doing, because what you want to try and do with C-Log 3 is you want the ISO to be right around 800. So if the ISO is saying 1250, 1600, then you want to adjust that shutter until it shows the ISO at 800. And the exposure, you'll see you want to try and hit it right in the middle. So that way, if things change a little bit, the exposure can compensate a little bit. And what I found is doing that, I get about 85% hit. So usually things look really, really well every time. And sometimes I play by the rules. Sometimes I don't. Sometimes I want to try different things. Like when I was shooting the apples on the tree, I shot at f22 because some of the apples were really, the sun was hitting them, whereas other apples were in shade. Then I tried f20 and I tried f18 and f16. And I wanted to get a balance between the light, the sun hitting the apples, and the apples in the shade. So in post, I could adjust the midtones. I could bring the midtones down a little bit. I could bring the saturation up just a little bit, and I'd bring in some curves. So here's how I grade. And I'm not going to put any B-roll behind this because it's going to take a while to do this, but here's how I grade it. So once I bring it in, I apply a LUT. And one of the LUTs I use, I can't remember the name, I call it R5, but basically it's a very simple LUT. And I bring in the R5 neutral, and if I find that, well, it's too bright, then I'll go back and I'll choose R5 minus a third stop, minus 2/3 stops, minus a stop. And those are the type of LUTs you want where you can ever so slightly adjust it. And if you don't have a LUT, well, then do it all manually. Start by doing a color balance, and then just start editing the rest of the stuff that I'm going to talk about. So once I've applied the LUT and I'm happy with that, usually what I do in the color wheels is on the midtones, I will bring them down. I just usually try going halfway down on the midtones. Take a look. Sometimes I go up a little bit. Sometimes I go down a bit. But sometimes the midtones are perfect. I don't monkey with them. And on the master saturation, in most scenes where it's sunny, I don't have to play around with the shadows and the midtones. I just bump up the saturation. You know that arrow on the saturation? Maybe just half a width of the saturation arrow or a full width of that saturation arrow, and that's usually enough. Then once I've done that, I go to color curves. And what I do in color curves is that white lumen line, the one at the top, I'm trying to describe it here without showing you on the screen because I don't have enough time to do all the B-roll for this. You want to pick a point that's kind of a third down from the top and a third up from the bottom, sometimes a fourth up and a fourth down. and try bringing up your highlights a little bit, try bringing down your shadows a little bit. And if it doesn't quite work, then reset it. Maybe try this. The points within your scene where you would like to play with the brightness, use the eyedropper right on the top right there and click on that part, and it's going to put a dot right on your line, and then you can play with that. And I find that that gives me the results I need most of the time. But now going back to that LUT, I'm going to try to find out where I bought it from. I tried looking before and I couldn't remember. Somebody had recommended it to me in the comments section, and still I can't find it. You get a lot of LUTs where they just give you crazy looks, and sometimes you'll apply the LUT and it's like underexposed or overexposed. I don't really care for those. What I like are the ones that basically take the footage that I've taken in log, where the camera's kind of stripped away the saturation, and bring it back, give it that natural look, and then I can go ahead and grade it if I want to give it a matrix look or anything. And the ones that allow you to do that usually give you up to 2 stops overexposed or 2 stops underexposed, and then usually pick 1/3. So quite often I always start with the native, where it's not adjusting the exposure at all, and I can see, okay, it's clipping the highlights a little bit, so I might try to bring it down 1/3 of a stop or 2/3 of a stop. Sometimes I do have to go into like 1 2/3 of a stop either way, but I find that this way to balance, to take that log footage, is going to make life a whole lot more simple. And hopefully I can try to find the link for you. But yeah, that's the best way to grade footage on the R5. And I got to tell you, I can't shoot 8-bit anymore. Even for my regular basic stuff with my son, I just don't see the point to it. With the exception of right here, everything I'm doing here is 8-bit. But look at the settings. I don't really want to pull anything out in the shadow. I want the shadows, I want it completely black. And then I want the lights, these beautiful lights here, to accent, to help separate me from the background. And then of course I've got some lights that are 5600 Kelvin on me. 8-bit is perfect for this scenario, but whenever I'm out in nature, always log. And even at night, and you'll see some people who say when you're shooting in low light, you never shoot log. I do. When I'm shooting my son outside, if I've got garden lights, it's the only way to go run and gun. I get it. If you're doing filmmaking, if you're setting a scene, you've got a truck here to provide lights, you've got a campfire and people are sitting down, you have time to properly adjust the camera. But with run and gun, you don't have that luxury. So when I'm shooting outside, I have these, I got these at Home Depot. These garden lights, they're Zen Pathway lights. They're 3 watts. They're $34.97 Canadian. They're probably around $26 US. They don't offer a whole lot of light, but it's enough that with the ISO set to auto, usually goes down to 25,600. And I find that it does really well. Yes, there's noise, but even on a 4K television, after I've graded it, it looks stunning. It just, the detail, seeing the light reflect off the leaves on the Japanese maple, it's just truly, truly amazing. So 99 times out of 100, I'm shooting C-Log 3. The channel, 100% of the time, in studio, I'm shooting 8-bit. And yeah, but even outside at night, I'm shooting 1/60th of a second. But here's the thing, the f-stop, completely wide open. I use the 50mm at f1.2 with the ISO usually around 25,600. So that's it for today. What time is it? I don't know how long I've been recording for. It says 51 minutes. That's way too long. I have to trim that down. But thanks so much for watching The Ordinary Filmmaker. Again, please click like and subscribe. I mean, it's just right there. Oh, come on, just click it, please. You don't have to watch the videos. Just go ahead and click it. Thank you. You've stuck around this long, right? Again, thank you so much for watching. Have yourself a great weekend, and we'll see you again soon. Well, you know, I've kind of already answered that question. So Canon Rumors came out this week and said, with a CR2, a validated rumor from a known source. And Craig, I know these are rumors, guys, but Craig is very good at validating and sussing out information. So when it comes to rumors on cameras, a lot of what Craig puts on his site, you can trust it. But again, look at his designation. Is it a CR0 or CR1? It's just speculative. But if he puts a CR2 or CR3, you want to consider that to be credible, because his track record on CR2s and CR3s is very, very good. Right, that being said, we are supposed to be getting an APS-C camera in the first half of 2022. And really, this makes a lot of sense. Canon's already tossed out a few breadcrumbs for us. They've said they've stopped producing new lenses and bodies for the EF mount. So they're kind of done with that. They'll still keep producing lenses and cameras that are selling. They're not completely done with it. The same with the EF-M mount. They'll still keep producing lenses and bodies that they've already put out there. But this need to go ahead and create new lenses, it's not there. All their development, the main focus of what Canon is doing with their camera line, their stills hybrid camera line, is on the RF mount, or the R system. And it just makes sense to bring an APS-C to that line. Now, as the market keeps shrinking, last year the market is, or this year the market is projected to reach 7.11 million sales worldwide. Mirrorless and DSLRs, interchangeable lens cameras, at 7.11 million. That's not much. So as the market keeps shrinking, Canon and others might make decisions to, well, eliminate certain models. And that's not completely unforeseen. They were supposed to be coming out with a 5D Mark V DSLR until things went crazy about a year ago, and they decided not to go ahead with that camera. Now, what I do expect them to do, I do expect them to come out with a successor to the 90D. It's a very, very popular camera. I also expect them to come out with a successor to the 7D Mark II, again on the R system. So yeah, definitely at this point, everything, all the information that we've got is pointing to APS-C cameras on the R system, and we can expect to see something by June of next year at the latest.